Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we're going on a journey into one of the most fascinating what-if stories in human history. A story that feels part legend, part tragedy, and part science fiction. So, let's play a little imagination game. Picture this, the single place where the entire knowledge of the ancient world was gathered together. Not just one culture's stories. Not just a handful of philosophers or priests. I mean everything that people, across every civilization, had discovered, written, or dreamed up until that point, scrolls from Greece, filled with plays and poetry. Writings from India, full of medicine and philosophy. Astronomical records from Babylon, calculations from Egypt, maybe even ancient Chinese innovations carried through trade routes. Imagine all of it, sitting together in one place, side by side, waiting for curious minds to pick it up and learn. Now, if I told you this place actually existed, you might think I was exaggerating. But it did. Thousands of years ago, in a city called Alexandria, in Egypt, there was a library that aimed to collect all of human knowledge under one roof. And its name still carries an almost mythical power, the Library of Alexandria. But here's the painful twist, it doesn't exist anymore. It was lost. It was burned, crumbled, neglected, erased. And with its disappearance, maybe centuries of human progress were wiped away. Think about that for a moment. It's like someone hitting delete on humanity's greatest hard drive. Gone forever. That's why people can't stop wondering about it. What was inside? How much knowledge did we lose? And the most exciting question of all, what if it had survived? Would the Renaissance have happened 1,000 years earlier? Would we have landed on the moon in the Middle Ages? Would we have cured deadly diseases centuries before they struck? Over the next 40 minutes, let's really dive deep into this. Let's slow it down. I'll take you through the world that created this library, why it was built, what it might have contained, how it was destroyed, and finally, what our world could look like if it had survived. So sit back, maybe grab a tea or coffee, and let's wander through time together. Let's walk the halls of the most legendary library that ever existed. To understand the Library of Alexandria, we have to start with the city itself. Alexandria wasn't just another port town on the Mediterranean. It was a vision, a statement of power, culture, and ambition. The story begins with Alexander the Great. Around 331 BCE, after conquering vast territories stretching from Greece to Egypt to parts of India, Alexander wanted to build a city that represented his empire's glory. A city that connected East and West. A city of trade, knowledge, and power. He chose a spot along Egypt's coast, near the Nile Delta, with access to the Mediterranean Sea, and there he founded Alexandria. After Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals. One of them, Ptolemy, took control of Egypt and founded the Ptolemaic dynasty. And here's where things get interesting, the Ptolemies didn't just want military power. They wanted cultural dominance. They wanted Alexandria to outshine Athens as the intellectual capital of the world. So, under Ptolemy I and especially Ptolemy II, they began to dream bigger. What better way to showcase power than to build a library, not just any library, but the greatest library the world had ever seen? Not a collection of local texts, but a universal archive, every scroll, from every land, in every language, and they weren't joking around. The Ptolemies issued orders that any ship docking in Alexandria's harbor had to surrender its manuscripts. Scribes would copy them. The originals stayed in the library, while the copies were returned to the owners. Some people call this intellectual piracy. But the Ptolemies called it preservation. They wanted to make sure that no knowledge ever slipped through their fingers. Now, try to imagine walking into the library itself. Historical descriptions are scarce, but we can piece together an image. Picture massive marble columns rising up to a high ceiling, beams of sunlight filtering through tall windows, the air filled with the smell of papyrus and ink. Scrolls stacked in rows upon rows, each one carrying a voice from another time, another place. The library wasn't just about storage. It was part of a larger institution called the Mauseon, the shrine to the Muses, the goddesses of inspiration in Greek mythology. This was more like a university than a simple library. It had lecture halls where scholars debated, gardens where plants were studied and catalogued like living encyclopedias, laboratories where experiments were carried out. Some accounts even mention an observatory, where astronomers tracked the stars. It was a research hub, a think tank, a gathering place for the brightest minds of the time. And it attracted scholars from across the world. Euclid, the mathematician whose geometry is still taught in schools today, is said to have worked in Alexandria. Eratosthenes, the man who calculated the circumference of the earth with nothing but shadows and sticks, served as chief librarian. Herophilus, one of the earliest anatomists, studied the human body there. And there were others, too, poets, philosophers, scientists, each adding to the collective knowledge stored in those scrolls. And let's not forget the librarians themselves. They weren't just caretakers, they were intellectual powerhouses. Zenodotus, the first head librarian, began the monumental task of cataloguing the scrolls. Callimachus, another librarian, compiled the Pinarches, essentially the world's first library catalogue, hundreds of volumes listing authors, titles, and subjects. Aristophanes of Byzantium refined texts, invented new symbols for grammar and punctuation. Eratosthenes, again, combined his role as librarian with his groundbreaking work in geography and mathematics. These librarians weren't just filing things away. They were editing, comparing, debating, and preserving. They turned the library into more than a collection, they made it an engine of progress. Now, let's talk about scale. Estimates vary wildly, but historians believe the library may have held anywhere from 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. To put that in perspective, even the lower estimate is staggering for the ancient world. Each scroll had to be hand-copied, painstakingly written out by scribes. It wasn't like printing books in the thousands. Every scroll represented hours, weeks, sometimes years of labor. So what did it feel like to stand there, surrounded by so much knowledge? Imagine being a scholar, walking down those endless aisles. You could study Egyptian medicine in the morning, Greek philosophy in the afternoon, and Babylonian astronomy by night. Ideas that once lived thousands of miles apart now sat side by side on the same shelf. It must have felt like living inside the mind of humanity itself, and this was the dream of the Library of Alexandria. Not just to gather knowledge, but to connect it, to let ideas collide, to spark new ones. It was a vision of human curiosity at its most ambitious. What might have been inside? All right, so we've built the stage. We're in Alexandria, we've walked through the marble halls, we've met the brilliant scholars and librarians. But here's the part that drives people crazy: we don't actually know what was inside. There's no surviving catalogue. The Great Index, the Pinarches compiled by Callimachus, is lost. So the shelves are blank in our imagination. And that means we get to speculate. Let's take a slow tour together. Room by room. Civilization by civilization. What might have been waiting for us inside those scrolls? Greek knowledge. Let's start with the Greeks. We already know some of their great works survived: Homer's epics, the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. But what about the ones that didn't? Sophocles wrote over 100 plays. Only 7 survive in full. Imagine walking into a room lined with shelves containing the other 93. What would they tell us about Greek drama, about society, about the way people thought and felt, or take philosophy? We've got the big names, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, but what about the fringe thinkers? The weird ones? The philosophers whose ideas never made it into the mainstream? Maybe they had ideas about the cosmos, politics, or ethics that were too radical for their time but might feel surprisingly modern today, and science. Archimedes was designing war machines and playing with levers and pulleys that still impress us today. What if more of his writings had survived? Some believe he had early concepts of calculus centuries before Newton. What if the library had preserved that chain of thought, Egyptian knowledge? Now let's step into another wing, Egypt's own contributions. Remember, Alexandria wasn't just Greek, it was built on Egyptian soil, with Egyptian traditions and knowledge flowing through it. Think of medicine. Ancient Egyptian doctors were already practicing surgery, dentistry, even prosthetics. They had extensive knowledge of herbs and treatments. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents we have, shows detailed lists of remedies. Now imagine shelves of scrolls just like that, filled with centuries of experiments, cures, and notes on what worked and what didn't, and then religion and ritual. The Egyptians had complex myths, but they also had an obsession with order, with measuring time, with tracking the stars. They created one of the world's first solar calendars. What if the library held centuries of astronomical observations written down by Egyptian priests? That alone could have propelled navigation and science forward by hundreds of years. Mesopotamian knowledge. Next stop, Mesopotamia, the land of Babylon and Assyria. These were civilizations obsessed with the sky. They tracked the movements of stars and planets for centuries, building giant tablets filled with astronomical data. Some of these survived on clay, but imagine scrolls translated into Greek or Egyptian, stored neatly in Alexandria. They also gave us math, early algebra, tables of multiplication, formulas for land measurement. If that knowledge had been preserved, maybe European math wouldn't have had to rediscover so much during the Middle Ages and law. The Code of Hammurabi is famous, but surely there were other legal codes, other systems of justice, written down and debated. Maybe the library preserved texts that would show us a completely different way of thinking about fairness and society. Indian knowledge. Let's move east, to India. Ancient Indian scholars were masters of mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. The concept of zero, something so basic to us now, was pioneered in India. Imagine if the library held early texts on zero and advanced arithmetic, centuries before Europe understood it. That alone could have transformed science and engineering much earlier. In medicine, India's Ayurvedic tradition was already sophisticated, covering surgery, pharmacology, diet, and mental health. What if those texts had been in Alexandria, influencing Greek and Roman doctors? Maybe modern medicine would have taken shape centuries earlier, and philosophy. Hinduism and Buddhism offered deep reflections on the mind, suffering, ethics, and the universe. If those ideas had been translated into Greek, they might have reshaped Western thought far earlier. Chinese knowledge. Now let's imagine scrolls arriving from China. Ancient China was a powerhouse of innovation. Paper, compasses, seismographs, intricate maps, agricultural manuals. Imagine those being copied and studied in Alexandria. The Chinese were also experimenting with mechanical inventions, crossbows, water-powered devices, even early stirrups for riding. If those ideas had spread west centuries earlier, Europe's technology might have leapt forward, and medicine, Chinese herbal knowledge, acupuncture, holistic approaches. Combined with Egyptian and Indian traditions, the library might have created the world's first global medical school. African knowledge. We can't forget Africa beyond Egypt. Civilizations in Nubia, Ethiopia, and further south had rich oral and written traditions. They traded, explored, and developed unique systems of agriculture, metallurgy, and architecture. Some scholars believe that early African knowledge of iron smelting was far ahead of other regions. If those scrolls had been captured in Alexandria, we might know a lot more about Africa's role in shaping early science, the imagination room, and then, the legends. This is where it gets wild. People love to imagine the library holding things like blueprints for machines centuries ahead of their time. Designs for steam engines, mechanical toys, even flight. Maps showing lands across the Atlantic. Was any of it real? Probably not. But the fact that we can't check the shelves leaves the door open. One thing is certain, the library represented a collision of worlds. Imagine an Indian medical text sitting beside a Greek philosophical treatise. A Babylonian star chart next to an Egyptian myth. A Chinese manual on farming next to a Roman poem. Ideas that would never have met in their home countries suddenly living side by side. That collision could have sparked revolutions in thought. Why it matters so? Why does this speculation matter? Because it shows us the scale of the loss. When you think of the Library of Alexandria, don't just imagine scrolls burning. Imagine a timeline snapping. Imagine centuries of progress being erased, humanity forced to start over, rediscovering things that we may have already known, and that's the heartbreak. The shelves may have held cures, inventions, philosophies, and art that could have changed everything. Instead, we live with the gaps. With the WhatIfs. The burning mystery. So, we've explored the dream of the Library of Alexandria and imagined what incredible treasures might have filled its shelves. But now we have to face the darker part of the story, the end. The greatest library in history is gone. It didn't simply fade away quietly, it was destroyed. The heartbreaking part is, we don't know exactly how. The details are blurred by time, by conflicting accounts, by politics, and by myth. What we're left with are theories, each with its own villains, accidents, or tragedies. Let's walk through them one by one. Theory 1, Julius Caesar's fire, 48 BCE. The first and most famous theory takes us back to the year 48 BCE. Julius Caesar is in Alexandria, fighting for his life during a civil war against Pompey's forces. Caesar, trapped in the harbor, orders the Roman fleet to be set on fire so it won't fall into enemy hands. The flames spread through the docks, leap to nearby warehouses, and, according to some accounts, reach the Library of Alexandria. Imagine the scene: ships burning in the harbor, smoke thick in the sky, soldiers running, citizens screaming. Then, across the city, flames licking at the great library itself. Scrolls, hundreds of thousands of them, turning to ash. Scholars rushing to grab what they can, carrying armfuls of manuscripts through the chaos. But the fire spreads too fast. The air fills with the smell of burning papyrus. The greatest treasure of humanity vanishes into smoke. Some ancient writers, like Plutarch, mention this version of events. Others, though, doubt whether the main library was actually destroyed at this point. Maybe only warehouses containing scrolls destined for the library burned. Maybe the central collection survived. The truth is uncertain. But even if it wasn't the final blow, Caesar's fire may have been the first deep-wound. Theory 2, the Roman emperors. Another theory points to what happened after Rome absorbed Egypt into its empire. The Roman emperors weren't always friends of knowledge. Some valued it, others, not so much. As Christianity began to rise, some emperors started to see pagan texts as dangerous or unnecessary. Knowledge that didn't fit with the new worldview might have been targeted, either openly destroyed or quietly neglected. Think about it. Scrolls that once represented centuries of careful observation about the stars, about medicine, about philosophy, may have simply been labeled heretical and thrown away. Not with one dramatic fire, but with 1,000 small acts of censorship and disinterest. Imagine entire shelves of texts condemned because they no longer match the dominant religion or political agenda. That slow erosion may have been just as deadly as any single blaze. Theory 3, Neglect and Decay. Here's a theory that feels less dramatic, but painfully realistic. The library didn't die in one catastrophic fire. It died of neglect. Think of a building so massive, filled with fragile papyrus scrolls. Without constant care, humidity, insects, and time itself would have started to eat away at the collection. If budgets were cut, if political priorities shifted, if the scholars who once gave the library its soul left or died, who would have been left to care for those fragile scrolls? Maybe the roof leaked during storms, and scrolls were ruined. Maybe insects chewed through entire shelves. Maybe mold and rot did what armies could not sometimes. The saddest story isn't a dramatic tragedy, it's slow indifference. A miracle allowed to become ordinary, until it simply faded away. Theory 4, the Serapeum. There's another angle here. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just one building. There was also the Serapeum, a daughter library housed in a temple dedicated to the god Serapis. Some historians believe that even if the main library suffered earlier losses, the Serapeum carried on as a secondary repository of knowledge. But in the 4th century CE, as Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire, pagan temples were targeted. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius issued decrees against pagan practices. The Serapeum was destroyed, its contents likely lost in the process. If this was indeed the final home of the surviving texts, then this might have been the library's last breath. Why the mystery matters. The frustrating thing is that we'll never know which of these theories, or which combination of them, is true. Did Caesar's fire destroy it all in one swoop? Did centuries of neglect slowly eat away at the collection? Did religious zeal wipe out the last remnants? We're left with fragments, rumors, conflicting accounts. And maybe that's why the story haunts us so much. If we had a clear culprit, we could point and say, that's who burned it. But instead, the mystery lingers, like smoke you can't quite clear from the air. The human cost. Now let's step away from the theories and imagine the human side. Picture a scribe who spent months copying a single scroll, pouring ink onto papyrus, perfecting each line. Picture a scholar who traveled across the Mediterranean, bringing a precious text as a gift, proud to know it would live in Alexandria. Now imagine them standing in the streets, watching flames devour everything. Watching decades, even centuries, of human labor vanish in minutes. That's not just knowledge lost. That's human effort, human dreams, human love for learning, reduced to smoke. It's like watching your life's work burn down in front of you. And multiply that by thousands of people, across centuries. That's the scale of the tragedy, the hope of fragments. But here's a thought. Maybe it's not all gone. Alexandria is a city layered on top of itself. Modern buildings sit on ancient ruins, which sit on even older foundations. Every time archaeologists dig, they find glimpses of the past, coins, pottery, inscriptions. Who's to say that somewhere, deep beneath the city, fragments of those scrolls don't still lie buried? It's unlikely, sure. Papyrus doesn't survive well over millennia. But the idea is enough to spark hope. Imagine the discovery, dusty fragments of a lost play, or a medical text, or a map of the world that changes history all over again. The world would lose its mind, and maybe that's the other lesson here. The mystery isn't just about what was lost, it's about what might still be waiting. So far, we've imagined the grandeur of the library, speculated about what might have been inside, and explored the tragic mystery of its destruction. But let's play the most fascinating game of all, the what-if game. What if the Library of Alexandria had survived? What if those hundreds of thousands of scrolls had made it through wars, neglect, and centuries of political chaos? How different would our world look today? Medicine, healing centuries earlier. Let's begin with medicine. Imagine if the writings of Egyptian physicians, Indian Ayurvedic scholars, and early Greek doctors had all been preserved and passed forward without interruption. Imagine centuries of notes on surgeries, herbal remedies, and disease patterns. Perhaps the understanding of infection and hygiene could have come 1,000 years earlier. Childbirth could have been safer in the Middle Ages. Epidemics that wiped out millions, the Black Death, smallpox, might have been mitigated, even prevented. Imagine if antibiotics had been discovered in the year 1000 instead of the 1900s. How many lives could that have saved? Astronomy and navigation, reaching the stars sooner. Now let's look up. The Babylonians had been charting stars for centuries. The Egyptians built calendars from celestial movements. The Greeks theorized about planets orbiting the sun long before it was accepted. If all of that knowledge had survived together, maybe astronomy would have leapt forward by centuries. Accurate star maps could have given sailors the tools for safe, long-distance voyages far earlier. Exploration might have reshaped global history, with continents connected much sooner and beyond Earth. What if the scientific revolution in space came not in the 20th century, but the 15th? Imagine Galileo peering through a telescope, not in the 1600s, but in the 600s. Imagine rockets in the Renaissance, satellites in the Middle Ages, maybe even a moon landing in Shakespeare's time. It sounds wild, but when you realize how much time we lost rediscovering old truths, it's not completely impossible. Engineering and technology, the Industrial Revolution before its time. Think about engineering. The Greeks were experimenting with steam-powered devices like Hero of Alexandria's Aeolipile, basically a toy steam engine. Imagine if that idea hadn't been forgotten for 1,700 years, but refined and expanded upon generation after generation. We could have had the Industrial Revolution not in the 1700s, but in the 1st century. Factories, engines, and machines transforming society long before medieval castles were even built. Transportation, communication, and manufacturing could have leapt forward so fast, history as we know it would be unrecognizable. Philosophy and politics, rethinking society. Early knowledge isn't just about science and technology. It's also about philosophy, law, and politics. Imagine if the ethical systems of India, the political theories of Greece, and the pragmatic laws of Mesopotamia had been preserved and merged. Maybe ideas about democracy, justice, or human rights could have developed centuries earlier. Slavery, oppression, inequality, perhaps humanity could have confronted these issues much sooner. Maybe women's rights would have come earlier. Maybe wars fought over superstition could have been avoided with reasoned debate supported by centuries of accumulated wisdom. The double-edged sword. But here's the darker possibility. Faster progress doesn't always mean better outcomes. Imagine nuclear-level technology in the year 1200. Imagine powerful weapons in the hands of empires that were already ruthless and ambitious. Would humanity have destroyed itself faster? Would earlier knowledge of chemistry and physics have turned wars into apocalyptic events long before we were ready to handle them? It's possible that the loss of the library slowed us down, but also bought us time to grow wiser, to develop ethical systems alongside our technologies. Maybe losing knowledge was, in a strange way, what allowed us to survive long enough to rebuild it. Today's lesson. So what's the takeaway? To me, the story of the Library of Alexandria is both inspiring and tragic. Inspiring, because thousands of years ago, humans already understood the value of knowledge. They wanted to preserve it, share it, expand it. That's a beautiful thing, but it's tragic because it shows us how fragile knowledge really is. Centuries of effort can vanish in an instant, whether by fire, neglect, or simple forgetfulness, and here's the part that hits home today. We think we're safe now, with the internet, with digital backups, with servers storing everything. But knowledge is still fragile. Servers crash. Links rot. Files get deleted. Even entire websites can disappear overnight. Preservation is a verb, it takes effort, constant care, and awareness. The question for you: so maybe the Library of Alexandria is more than just a sad story from the past. Maybe it's a reminder for us today. Every time you back up a file, every time you save a photo to the cloud, you're doing what those librarians dreamed of doing, making sure knowledge doesn't vanish. And here's a question I want to leave you with. If you could recover just one scroll from that library, just one, what would you want it to be? Would you choose a lost play by Sophocles? A medical text that could save lives? A map that proved ancient explorers reached faraway lands? Or maybe something none of us can even imagine, something that changes our entire understanding of human history? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because maybe the most important part of the Library of Alexandria isn't just what was lost, it's the curiosity it still sparks in us today.